Hello and welcome. I've recently released a League Start guide for Path of Exile to kind of go over some basic things you should consider when League starting. Today, I want to expand on that and go into some specific League Start strategies you could consider and how you would go about that, how that would affect your build, and how that would affect the first few days of your gameplay. Now, keep in mind, when I say League Start, I do not necessarily just mean the first 24 hours. I'm really thinking about how will this affect week 1, because regardless of your overall strategy, the first 24 hours will look pretty similar for most of us. We're going to be going through the story, we're going to be leveling, and we're going to be doing the early maps so that we can get our currency, get our build established, and get our strategy established. Which leads me directly into League strategy number 1, mapping. Now, mapping is a core element of the game. Most likely, regardless of which strategy you're doing, you will do mapping at some point. This is kind of unavoidable. But mapping itself can be a League Start strategy to make money. This is going to be quite varied. You might want to get into Tier 16 maps as quickly as possible, sustain as many Tier 16s as you can, and sell them, because they're pretty good money. Also, you might want to consider getting your Awakener level up, sell the uniques that drop, sell the Shaper and Elder influence maps that drop, sell the Guardians, all these things. That can be a mapping strategy. You might say, I want to sustain infinite burial chambers or infinite tower, and start farming those doctor cards and sell them when the price goes up. That could be a perfectly valid strategy. You could say, I'm just going to run Beach over and over and over again until my eyes bleed and level a bunch of gems and make a bunch of currency. That is another mapping strategy. Something to consider for all of these is your atlas plays a huge part in your mapping strategy. So build your atlas around whatever strategy you come up with. If it's sustaining burial chamber or towers, there's ways to set that up. If it's 16s, you want to complete as much as possible, so on and so forth. You might want to tailor your build around this as well. If your strategy is running a lot of maps quickly, you want something that moves pretty quickly, you want something that clears efficiently. It doesn't have to have the best single target. You don't want it to be garbage. You want to be able to kill the map boss or a random rogue Exile or Betrayal or whatever happens to pop up in your map. But you don't need it to be instantly able to do Uber Elder or something, because that's just not part of your plan. So in terms of builds that I would suggest, something like Poison Blade Vortex comes to mind. If you play an Assassin, you'll have oodles of damage. You'll have decent sustain while you're clearing, especially if you can get yourself an early Cinder Swallow or some sort of life gained on kill mechanic. It's generally quite inexpensive to start out. It will be a little on the squishy side, but you can add defensive layers like Mistwall to help mitigate some of this, as that item is usually not too expensive early in the league. Now onto strategy number 2. Bossing. In a lot of ways, bossing is the literal opposite of mapping, because you don't care about clearing quickly, moving quickly, or anything like that. You care about killing one big scary dude without him being able to kill you. If you're bossing, you want to, again, level through a mapping build, get to whatever progression point allows you to access that boss, and then use that boss to sustain future runs. So if you're doing something like Atziri, you can do Atziri and then do Uber Atziri, sell all the maps that you get from both of these, buy more sets, continue to farm the items, go after those disfavors, the vertex, things that people will want early on. Similarly, you could start out and say, I'm going to do Shaper, and I'm going to collect a bunch of Shaper fragments, and I'm going to do Uber Elder. And I'm going to sell, the Indigons, the Mark of the Shaper, Mark of the Elder, Watcher's Eye, all those things that people are again going to want to scramble for to get into their builds as soon as possible. If you are doing something like a bossing atlas strategy, I strongly advise that you play a build that can easily preload damage, such as a miner. This way, as the boss is phasing and invulnerable, you are still able to get damage out, which will help a lot when you are under-geared. Also, keep in mind that the defenses really all depend on your level of comfort. Some people will want a build that can take a hit from the boss they're killing. Other people are like, you know what, I've killed this 500 times. I'm only going to get hit once every few runs at best. I can just dodge everything and play a pretty glassy build and just sacrifice defense for damage early on. If you are bossing, it can often help a lot if you have a trader, someone to be selling your stuff while you keep chaining runs, buying you more fragments. Also, keep in mind that if you are doing Atziri runs, they are quite good for gem EXP, and this will boost your profits day 1, 2, and 3 hugely. Now, strategy number 3 goes back to the mapping angle a little bit. With Blighted Maps. If you want to run Blighted Maps, keep in mind, everyone will be needing oils for their anointments. Everyone wants to anoint their amulet these days. It's a really strong way to increase your character power level, and it's usually fairly inexpensive relative to other things. So if that's the case, a lot of people are going to be buying oils. That means you can do Blighted Maps, you can sell them the oils and profit. Also, Blighted Maps have a wide variety of other drops. You might get uniques, divination cards, enchanted helmets, fragments, you name it. Your goal is going to be to get a pool of currency from your early mapping. You don't really care too much about your atlas, very similar in a lot of ways to bossing, minus bossing for Cirrus specifically, which requires atlas progression. And from that point, you want to get into Blighted Maps, play a build such as a Golemancer that is quite efficient at clear, dealing with things in a wide range of your screen. Spectre Summoners also come to mind. Both are pretty efficient and inexpensive to scale and can clear Blighted Maps quite easily. Once you do this, you'll want to start with low-tier Blighted Maps, whatever you can afford, run the maps, sell the drops, sell the oils, reinvest those in higher-tier maps, work your way up to at least tier 14s, because once you start getting into the higher-tier maps, you can get things like Shaper Fragments, which will sell for a very large chunk to people like the bossers mentioned in method number 2. On to strategy number 4, delving. There are really 2 ways to pursue this. The first would be to farm fossils and farm resonators. This can be done at a fairly low depth and does not require much experience. You'll want a build that has really good survivability against darkness. The Keystone Agnostic comes to mind as a way to do that, especially on the cheap. What you do is you get a character that can run around in darkness, flare only occasionally, and you go and you break walls. When you break the wall, there might be a resonator cache, there might be a fossil cache, and you just keep going sideways and selling these. Early on, it is not unheard of for there to be fossils worth 5 to 15 chaos that are fairly easy to target farm. And remember, early league, 15 chaos is quite a lot because that could be a third or a fifth of an exalted orb. The second method is to deep delve. If you're deep delving, you really want to practice and to know what you're doing, because it's going to be important that you get very deep early in the league before other people can do it. Now, one build that is very effective at this is Mothraelite's Herald of Agony Raider, which I will link down in the description below. If you're doing this, you want to level up using a different build most of the time. Then when you've decided, okay, I have enough money, I've bought a bunch of Sulfite Scarabs, I'm ready to start digging, you invest in delve, you go straight down, break walls on the way. If you can kill bosses on the way, that's awesome. These things will provide your seed money to keep fueling it. The deeper you get, the more money you will be able to get because you are setting the prices, you are determining the market, especially on rare fossils such as Bloodstained or Faceted. If you are the deepest person, essentially the market follows you. The closer to the deepest person that you are, the more influence you have over the market. So it is very much a race against other players. I would argue far more so than many of the other methods outlined. And finally, number 5, something that's completely different and is the only version that does not actually require you to reach maps to pursue it. That is betrayal farming. So masters have always been a very good source of money in Path of Exile. Betrayal farming means that you'll set up your syndicate board, usually focusing on research and intervention. Research to get syndicate benches that you can either use to profit yourself, such as adding white sockets to the pariah or creating pure breachstones, or sell to other players as a service. Intervention gives you scarabs. Most of the time, gilded scarabs will be fairly valuable. The exact ones that are the most expensive do vary league by league, but typically things like gilded bestiary come to mind as a reliable moneymaker. Gilded Harbinger could be good, Gilded Shaper, Gilded Metamorph. Whatever is in demand, you will be able to set up different syndicate members to farm them and to profit off of them. This is different because you don't need to reach maps at all. You can set this whole thing up very effectively without ever leaving the foothills. So it's very friendly in terms of gear and in terms of build. All you really need, something that can move fast and something that can kill Act 9 enemies, which, as you will quickly over-level the zone, is pretty trivial. Now, the other difference is that you're going to have to probably do a lot more research compared to especially the first 3 methods on how to do it and put in work on your end rather than just playing the game and going with the flow. But it is very rewarding. I have seen people make dozens of exalts within the first week. I'm sure you could make a mirror doing this if you put your mind to it. I just don't know anyone who has done that personally. And so those are my 5 methods for league start strategies. These are far from the only strategies, but keep in mind that whatever you are doing, the more that you invest into it, the better the results will be. So if you're delving, buying Gilded Scarabs is helpful. If you're mapping, running a 5-way to unlock the extra Atlas slot so you can juice your maps even more will reward you exponentially more than not doing it. So whatever your method is, make sure you invest in your character, make sure you invest in your strategy, and you will be rewarded. The only method that I would not advise to newer players would be the delving method from this list. I think it is a little harder to do, and you could very quickly find yourself over your head, especially if you try the deep delving method. But you know what? If you feel you really want to do it, we have some time before the next league. Practice it now, get that out of the way, and you will be fine on league start. And the last point I'd like to touch upon quickly is something that I did talk about in my League Start Guide around tempering expectations. What you want to do is look at what was my performance last, how can I improve on that, not what was my performance compared to my favorite streamer or compared to Reddit, because realistically, you can always do better no matter how good at Path of Exile you are. And you are mainly competing against yourself. Very rarely will you find yourself competing against the top-end players unless your goal is saying like, I want to be the first level 100 in the new league, in which case, yes, you are competing against other people and how good they are does come into play. Now, I say this as a slight caveat to that. If you're doing any sort of crafting or heavy economy stuff, you are directly competing against other players because the richest people have the most control over prices. But if you aren't trying to influence prices yourself, you're just going with, I'm going to sell items that are expensive. If you do the research to look for the niche that other people have created, you can work symbiotically with those top competitive players, such as if Mathel makes a damage over time build and you want to farm fossils, farm and sell corroded fossils. You're not competing against Mathel. You're just profiting off the fact that all of Mathel's viewers want fossils to roll their damage over time weapons for the build that he made. So keep that in mind. Try to keep your standards and expectations realistic. Remember your last league start and always try to do better. Always push yourself to improve. Do something that is a little bit uncomfortable and have fun. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found this helpful. Again, I will link several resources in the description below, including some build guides and my previous League Start guide to provide some context. Thank you for watching. Stay sane, Exiles.